morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'll be speaking for exactly 20 minutes, and then I'm looking forward to the panel afterwards. We are, as you know, in the midst of a profound global economic crisis. Fossil fuel energies have now matured. The prices of coal, oil, natural gas, shale gas, tar sands, heavy oil, those prices are going to continue to go up in the next 20 years. At the same time, the technologies based on these energies, like the internal combustion engine, centralized electrification, are outmoded. They've exhausted their S-curve. There's very little productivity boost left in them. And the entire infrastructure of this civilization that's made out of carbon-based fuels is now on life support. This economic crisis is now giving rise to an even more profound climate change crisis. We've spewed so much CO2 and methane and nitrous oxide into the atmosphere during the Industrial Revolution that we now are seeing a basic shift in the hydrological cycle, the water cycle of this planet. And as a result, we're getting more bitter winter snows, more profound spring floods, and more prolonged summer droughts, and it's destabilizing our ecosystems and threatening our ability to maintain life, including human life, on this planet. So what do? Let me share an anecdote with you. When Chancellor Merkel became Chancellor of Germany, she asked me to come to Berlin in the first few weeks of her new government to help her address the question, how do we grow the German economy in the 21st century? When I got to Berlin, the first question I asked the Chancellor is, Madam Chancellor, how do you grow the German economy or the European Union economy or the global economy in the mature stages of an energy era where the energies are expensive and the technologies have matured? This is an issue not just facing Germany and Europe. It faces China, the US, and the entire world. So what do? We need a new economic vision for the world that's compelling. We need a new economic game plan for that vision that's deliverable. And we need this plan to move as quickly in the emerging nations as in industrialized nations. We have to be off carbon by 2030 if we have any chance of addressing climate change before we've tipped over the edge. So we need to step back and ask the question, how do the great economic revolutions in history occur? If we know how they occur, we can get a roadmap here on what we need to do to move the human race forward on this planet. The great economic revolutions in history come about when two phenomena merge: energy regimes and communication revolutions to manage them. All throughout history, we have been very ingenious at creating new forms of energy on this planet to organize life. New energy regimes make possible to bring together more people, differentiate labor skills, integrate people into larger social units. But the complexities of these new energy regimes then require new communication revolutions agile enough to manage them. All through history, when communication revolutions merge, converge, and join with energy revolutions, it changes the economic footprint, the paradigm. It actually changes consciousness and changes our temporal relationships, our spatial relationships in very fundamental ways. Let me give you an example. The 19th century, first industrial revolution, a convergence of communication and energy. We went from steam-powered print presses, we went from manual print presses to steam-powered printing. So we can mass produce large volumes of printed material very cheaply. Then we introduced public schools, and we created a print-literate workforce with the communication skills to manage a very complex, coal-powered, steam-driven, rail-run industrial revolution. We could never have organized the first industrial revolution with an illiterate workforce. 20th century, another convergence of communication and energy, a second industrial revolution. Centralized electrification, and especially the telephone, later radio and television, became the communication media to manage a dispersed auto and oil era a suburban society, a mass consumer culture. And now that second industrial revolution is clearly on life support. We can smell it all over the world. It's dying right in front of us. We are, however, right now on the cusp of a third industrial revolution, a new convergence of communication energy. Europe is leading in this, but we are still not moving as quickly as we should. We had a very powerful communication revolution in the last 20 years, the personal computer and the internet. And what's so interesting about this communication revolution is the way it's organized. I grew up on centralized communication, one-to-many, top-down, telephone, radio, television, newspapers, and magazines. What's so interesting about the internet is it is organized differently. It's not centralized and top-down. This communication is distributed. It's organized collaboratively, and it scales to lateral power, not centralized power. So today, and this always amazes me, you know, the World Wide Web came online in 1990. 22 years later, 1/3 of the human race, with little cell phones and desktop computers, can send audio, video, and text to each other at almost zero marginal cost, with far more distributed collaborative lateral power than all the centralized television networks of the last quarter of the 20th century. We did this in 22 years. But that's only half the story. Half the story. What's happening now in Europe, and especially in countries like Germany and Denmark and the Netherlands, etc., is this distributed, collaborative, laterally scaled communication revolution, the internet, is just now beginning to merge with a new energy regime. Distributed energies, which have to be organized collaboratively and scale laterally. It's a perfect fit of communication energy. What are distributed energies? Well, let me compare them to elite energies. Coal, oil, natural gas, tar sand, shale gas. They're elite. They're not found in the backyard. They're found in only a few places. They require huge military and geopolitical commitments to secure them and massive capital to finance them from the wellhead to the end user. And now they're sunsetting. Distributed energies. Those are energies that are found in the backyard. The sun shines all over the world every day. 45 minutes of sunlight can power this economy for a year with no problems. The wind blows across the earth 24 hours a day. If we harness 20% of that wind, we have 7 times more power than we will need for our global economy. Underneath the ground, we have a hot geothermal core of energy ready to be converted to our use everywhere on the planet overnight. In the rural areas, we have agricultural and forestry waste that can be converted back to energy. In the coastal areas, our urban populations have the ocean tides and waves as a source of energy coming in every single day. We have enough of these distributed energies in every square inch of this planet to provide for our species until kingdom comes. The European Union has made a formal commitment to a 5-pillar third industrial revolution infrastructure that could change the economic paradigm, address climate change, and create a more sustained and humanable world for the 21st century. I was privileged to develop this plan with the European Union, the European Parliament, the Council, and the Commission over the last 12 years. Let me lay this out. Pillar 1, we have a commitment now to 20% renewable energies in Europe by 2020. That's a mandate, not a suggestion. Every region has to get there. Pillar 2, how do we collect distributed renewable energies? Now, you know, our first thought was we'll go to Italy and Greece and Spain and we'll build some big solar parks and ship that electricity out. The Irish will have offshore wind. The Norwegians will have hydro, centralize and ship. None of us oppose this. These are quick. They need to be done. They're essential, but they're not sufficient. What we're learning in Europe is we can't build enough of these centralized parks to provide the energy for a continent. And the point is, if renewable energies are distributed and found everywhere, why are we collecting them only a few central points? The aha moment, we were thinking 20th century based on centralized fossil fuels and nuclear power. So if these energies are found everywhere, distributed energies, we need to collect them everywhere in Europe, and that means infrastructure. We collect them in, around, on, and above our buildings. We have 191 million buildings in the European Union, homes, offices, factories. And the goal in Pillar 2 is to convert energy efficiencies and then convert every single existing building in Europe to your own personal green micro power plant, to collect solar off the roof, wind off the side of the buildings, geothermal heat underneath the buildings, garbage, anaerobically converted energy in the kitchens, etc. The new buildings will be legislated as zero emission and positive power. Olivier Bouygues and his brother Martin have the first positive power office complex already up in Paris. Others are coming very quickly. Pillar 2 jumpstarts construction. Millions of jobs, thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises and global companies will have to mobilize to convert the infrastructure of Europe to our own personal power plants. That'll keep 2 generations busy with jobs. Let me use the analogy here. 1970, there were a few centralized mainframe computers, and they were sharing information, very expensive, between them. Then Steve Jobs comes along and creates the personal computer. Today, a third of the human race can now connect with each other and share information at zero marginal cost. Similarly, today in Europe and around the world, we have a few giant power and utility companies. They produce the electricity, we buy it. But already in Europe, we have several million small players producing their own green electricity on site, in and around their buildings and infrastructure. In 10 years from now, we're going to have tens of millions of buildings, not only in Europe, but around the world, converted to produce a tiny bit of their own green electricity. The new buildings will be positive power. In 20 years from now, we're going to have several 100 million buildings on this planet producing a tiny bit of their own green electricity on site. The reason we know this, my global team has run the numbers, our economists, and this shift to renewable energies is following the same cost curve, exponential cost curve, as happened when we went from centralized computers to desktop computers and cell phones. And that is that the cost for harvesting renewable energies, the technologies, solar, wind, etc., especially solar and wind, are becoming cheaper and cheaper as we scale in. And eventually, all of these harvesting technologies, solar, wind, geothermal, biomass converters, they're going to be as cheap as cell phones in 20 years from now. It's an exponential cost curve following along the same lines as computer chips. And when the technology becomes that cheap, is cheap enough to give it away, the sun off the roof on your factory, it's free. The wind off the wall of your home, that's free. The geothermal heat underneath your office building, that's free. So just as we've democratized information with the internet, and the marginal cost of sharing information is now free once the infrastructure's in, same thing with renewable energies. The energies themselves are free as the technology become cheap enough to harvest them. Pillar 2. Pillar 3, storage. The sun isn't always shining. The wind sometimes blows at night. We need the electricity during the day. Water tables can be down because of droughts for hydroelectricity. They're intermittent energies. We have to store them, or we can't have this revolution. I'm in favor of all storage technologies, flywheels, batteries, capacitors, water pumping. We have, however, put a tremendous amount of focus at the EU level on hydrogen as a basic storage unit. We like all of them. We've put 8 billion euros of public-private funds into hydrogen. It's modular. You can use it in an apartment complex and a big utility to store these green energies. Pillar 4, this is the critical pillar, the supergrid. It's actually an energy internet. We are now beginning to take off-the-shelf internet technology in Europe, and we are beginning to transform the power grid, the transmission and distribution lines, so that when millions and millions and millions of buildings begin to produce, they already are, a little bit of their own green electricity, they can store it in hydrogen and other storage technologies, like we store media in digital storage. And then if you don't need some of that electricity at any given time of the day or week, your software can program so you can sell your green electricity across a distributed supergrid, really an energy internet from the Irish Sea all the way to the border of Russia. Just like we now create our own information, store it in digital, share it online. This is an energy internet. The coming together of communications technology, the internet technologies, with distributed energies. Pillar 5, logistics and transport. Electric vehicles are here now. Fuel cell cars, trucks, and buses will be in mass production in 2015. We'll be able to plug in our vehicles anywhere where there is the energy internet, get green electricity, and then wherever we park our vehicles, there are plugs everywhere across the region. We plug back in, get green electricity, or if the price is right on dynamic pricing, our computer can sell our electricity from our vehicles back to the grid. Let me emphasize that the supergrid that you're discussing today is the nervous system for this infrastructure, but it does not stand alone. These 5 pillars I've just mentioned are meaningless by themselves, including the supergrid. They only become operational as we phase in these 5 pillars and connect them. This is a mega technology platform, an infrastructure, a general purpose infrastructure for a completely new economic paradigm. Do not make the mistake that President Obama made. He wanted a green economy, he still does, it didn't happen. Because he spent billions of dollars of US stimulus money on standalone piloted projects. So there'd be a little advanced meter projects for the supergrid in one state, and then maybe a solar factory over in another state, and a battery factory in a third state, unconnected, piloted, siloed. These technologies do not stand alone. They're components of an infrastructure. It's only when you phase them in that you create the possibilities of new jobs, businesses, and a new economy. The second industrial revolution was the same thing. You needed the automobile, the highways, the gasoline pipelines, the centralized electrification to go to the rural areas to create the suburbs. It all had to come in at the same time. We're learning this lesson in Europe. And this is important for the people in this room on the supergrid because you're at the center of this network. Pillar 1, feed-in tariffs have been successful. So we have several million right now, small players, over a couple million now, trying to get green electricity into the grid because Pillar 1 has been successful. But we haven't moved Pillar 4, the distributed power grid, the energy internet, is still an old servo-mechanical power and transmission grid. It was designed to go one direction and centralize, and it leaks 20% of the electricity. It's disgraceful. So we've got several million players trying to get green electricity into their grid. Pillar 1 is working, but we haven't moved the distributed power grid, Pillar 4, so that millions of players' energy can be dealt with on peak loads, base loads, and management. And then Pillar 1 has been so successful, we now have some regions of Europe that are 50 and 60% green electricity. But we haven't moved Pillar 3, storage. So we're losing 3 out of 4 kilowatts because the wind's blowing at night. We need the electricity during the day. Sometimes the sun surges at noon and you have negative electricity, and by midnight, the electricity is going through the roof because we didn't put in storage. And then our automobile companies in Europe are panicked. They're putting in electric vehicles and now moving on fuel cell vehicles, but if the other 4 pillars are not synergistically phased in, these vehicles are orphaned. They'll be completely useless. So what I'm saying here to you this morning is that the supergrid, and I really think we should start calling it, it's an energy internet, the grid. It's essential that this grid not come in isolation, but that we see it as part of an infrastructure revolution. It is the communication vehicle to manage green electricities in a distributed, collaborative, laterally scaled world. This supergrid, this energy internet, is power to the people. And just as we've democratized information and changed the world and laterally scaled power, when the internet can then join with distributed energies and we create a supergrid, a distributed energy internet, then we've democratized energy. That's a game changer. I grew up on the notion that power is always pyramidal and that lateral power is an oxymoron. But for an entire generation in Europe and around the world under 30, peer-to-peer power, lateral power, makes far more sense. Let me say in the last few minutes, The music companies did not understand lateral power. When millions of kids started sharing information on the internet and started sharing and file sharing music, the music companies thought it was a joke, then they went out of business. The newspapers did not understand the blogosphere. Millions of people sharing information, video, and text. Now newspapers are either going out of business or trying to create blogs. As powerful as that force was, when we put in the supergrid, the distributed energy internet, and millions of people are sharing their own green electricity, that will fundamentally change the political and economic landscape. Last thought. The European Union has a golden goose, but it's not feeding it. And that's why you're at this conference today. You're going to be critical of people in this room. We have 500 million consumers in the EU. We have another 500 million consumers in the partnership regions in the Mediterranean, the Gulf, and North Africa. That's 1 billion people. That's the biggest potential market in the world. What's missing is its integration. What we need to do is bring in this 5-pillar third industrial revolution infrastructure like Wi-Fi, notably across every region of Europe and in the partnership regions, so we have a fully functional infrastructure so that 1 billion people can engage in commerce and trade in a sustainable, post-carbon, efficient, highly productive third industrial revolution infrastructure. Last thought. 85% of all productivity gains is thermodynamic efficiencies. Only 15% is machine capital to worker and worker performance. Infrastructures are critical. The second industrial revolution infrastructure increased our efficiencies in production from 2% in 1900 to about 14% in the 1970s. Then it leveled off. We got to about 14% efficiencies on productivity. The third industrial revolution with the supergrid, the distributed energy internet as the nervous system, can move our efficiencies from 14%, and listen to this, to 60% in the next 30 years. We will never get beyond that because of thermodynamic efficiency limits, but imagine going from 14% efficiencies to 60% efficiencies. That is massive, dramatic increase in productivity by using less energy, by using renewable energy, and by using it sustainably. So it's not about whether we are more efficient or not. The environmentalists say be more efficient, and the business leaders say we won't grow then. The business leadership has to wake up. The more thermodynamic efficient we are, the higher our productivity, the less energy we use, the more effective we can produce goods and services. So the mission here in this room, all the players are here, and many of you I know, and I'm glad to be with you today. You need to move, and we need to move the energy internet, the supergrid, quickly across Europe as the nervous system for an infrastructure revolution. You cannot go it alone. You need to join with all the other pillars and together create a force across Europe, if you will, a mega lobby to move an infrastructure revolution with the supergrid, the energy internet, at the very center of this great economic paradigm shift. We have no plan B. If we don't put these 5 pillars in across Europe in the next 7 years with the new structural funds coming in cohesion funds, we're not going to make it. The world's looking to Europe. Europe now has to get the job done. And the people in this room, you will be at the very center of this movement to create a paradigm shift. So it's a privilege and honor to be with you this morning, and I look forward to the panel.